Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. So today I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Tom Hewitt to the show. So Tom is the founder of Surfers Not Street Children, which is a charity he founded in the late 90s, working with street and at-risk children in Durban and now in Mozambique as well. And the program has done some really incredible work with these children and introduced them to the joys of surfing as well. So I can connect with this charity on so many different levels. And it's had some pretty high profile visitors and patrons as well, visited by the Queen, by Prince Harry. Tom's worked with the Pope in his Mozambique program. And it's also got this huge long line of surfing royalty and glitterati who've supported it as well. And I've been following Tom's work for a while. So obviously, it goes without saying that I'm really excited to be speaking to him. But his work has particular resonance for me because being born in Durban in apartheid era South Africa, and as someone who's grown up with Durban as a backdrop to my life, I'm really familiar both with its beauty and the wonders that is the Durban beachfront and the wonderful waves and sea, but also with the real deprivation and the poverty and the real inequality that also exists literally just behind those sort of front row flats as well. So to see how Tom has combined his love of surfing and his passion for what it can do and bring to people's lives in order to help these street children who have suffered from in this way has been incredibly inspiring. And like I said, has connected with a real chord for me. So it's so thrilling to be able to speak to him firsthand, to find out a little bit more about his inspiration for starting the charity, where the idea came from, and really what his plans for the future are as well. So thank you so much for agreeing to join me, Tom. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So my first question's got to be, and I know this is quite a long story, but I think it is really worth telling and worth hearing from you, is what inspired you to set up the charity in the first place? Where did the motivation and idea come from?
Yeah, the Surfers Not Street Children was actually set up. I founded it in 1998, and it wasn't called Surfers Not Street Children then. It was called the Durban Street Team. And it came out of, I'd been working with street children for a few years before then in a different part of the country, down in the Eastern Cape. And if you rewind a bit, I'd gone out to South Africa. I grew up in the UK, and I'd gone out at 18 on an anti-apartheid fact-finding trip, actually with my father. And he was involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And while I was there, I was really incredibly inspired by kids. Sorry, excuse me. It's my son, sorry.
Okay.
May have to edit that bit.
No, that's all right. I'll probably just leave it in. Yeah, carry on.
I'm at Croyd Beach, by the way, at the moment.
Oh,
so,
lovely. One of my favourite places as well. I can hear the seagulls in the background as well.
So I'd been out on this anti-apartheid trip, and I'd met with incredible activists throughout that time. And that really inspired me. And it made me want to stay out there and to be involved, not because the era was a particularly pleasant one. I mean, it was still the apartheid era, but because of the inspiration and the camaraderie, I suppose, of people. And I think it's fair to say, I mean, given the name of this show, there was a sense of adventure in being alongside those people. And I was just a sort of very, very lowly volunteer. You can imagine 18 years old from the UK. I mean, pretty useless in that situation. But fortunately, the people I was connected to there within the ANC humored me and very graciously allowed me to sort of lend a little hand. And it was an incredible time and quite a amazing time in terms of being a very tiny part of that change in history, or at least witnessing it. So of course I'm there at that time. And at the end of that trip, I went to Mozambique. And at that time, Mozambique was in the midst of a civil war. And so we flew into Maputo, and it was, literally flying into a war zone. And it was quite shocking for me as a young 18-year-old, hearing machine gun fire at night. And, the city was pretty destroyed. there wasn't, the roads were completely potholed and there were bullet holes in the walls, and it's quite an amazing experience, quite shocking. And while I was there, we stayed with somebody who, we had dinner. I remember it really well. We had dinner with someone, and those days, there wasn't sort of an abundance of food. It was a really skinny chicken and cassava. I remember a lot of cassava. I love cassava, actually. And at the end of the meal, he said, "Oh, I want to introduce you to some friends." And I was like, "Great." And we walked outside, and he introduced me to what has to have been, I remember back, it must have been at least 70 or 80, maybe more, children on the streets, literally outside his apartment block. And they were out there because this guy was kind of a beacon of hope for them, and looked after them as much as he could. He didn't have somewhere for them to stay, but he made sure everyone had blankets and was fed. And I had never imagined that there was such thing as street children, as kids living on the streets. It just hadn't really crossed my radar. And if it had, I hadn't taken note of it, because I was really shocked. It was extraordinary to me that children were living on the streets. And so when I went back into South Africa after that, I was asking around people within the ANC and others, what's happening now? What's happening with the street children? And of course, they were completely consumed with the bigger picture, which was the transformation of movement from the old South African apartheid regime to the new South Africa. So it's not that people didn't care, but they were like, I don't know what's happening with the street kids. So I said to people, well, how about if I get involved there? And I think people were very friendly. And I just think they were like, yeah, whatever, again, from a caring perspective, but there were such big movements at play politically at the time. And like I said, I was an extremely small fish.
Gosh. And so how did it evolve from there then? I mean, to become, because, one thing that really struck me as well is how long you've been operating, which I guess for a small charity, having spoken to people who have set up and run charity, there's so much work that goes into that, and even getting it started and then to keep it going for that period of time. I mean, how did it then evolve into sort of, I guess, what it's become today?
Well, when I started working with street children in 1992, and that was before the end of apartheid. So I carried on doing bits and bobs outside of the issue of street children. I was a peace monitor at the first free and fair elections in South Africa in 94. But I really had sort of embraced this idea of working with street children. I worked at two really incredible programs at the time. And sort of to cut a long story short, but 1998 was when I decided to move up from the Eastern Cape, where I had been based, to Durban. And the reason for going up there was because that was kind of the hub. Durban was the hub of street children as an issue within, or as a phenomena within South Africa. And there were reasons for that as well. Kids would come down from Johannesburg or up from the Transkei, because you could live on the streets, at least in terms of the climate, you could live on the streets in Durban all year round. And that's not the same in some of the other parts of South Africa. So it became this kind of melting pot. Kids would come from as far as Cape Town even sometimes. And I really wanted to be in the middle of where the problem was the worst. And we'd had quite a lot of impact on the city of East London in South Africa, in the Eastern Cape. And so I wanted to go up to Durban and at first just work with local organizations. But when I got there, I realized that there was actually quite a deficit there. And not thinking for a moment that I had sort of the wherewithal to run an organization, I sort of launched myself headlong into starting an operation, you could, I suppose, call it, which was I rallied sort of 4 or 5 untrained outreach workers who basically just wanted to help street kids. You got to remember at the time, it was anarchy. And why I say anarchy, you had a welfare system that was built for whites. And when the walls came down from apartheid, the system just burst at the seams. It could not cope with the black population. It wasn't designed for the black population. And so you had a situation of anarchy. And actually, that was where we were quite successful at the beginning, was that we were able to navigate and that anarchy and set up something with integrity within that. Now, of course, if you bring it up to present day, we've professionalized and trained workers, all of that. But at the time, that wasn't really available to us, and so it was kind of wanting to be in the middle of where the situation was worse. At its worst was how I ended up in Durban, and we just called our team the Durban Street Team at the time. Literally, we have one vehicle, and we used to drive around the streets and just help out where we could. And within a couple of years, we formalized that into an organization. And I was sort of reporting to people in the UK to try and rally support for this. And little did I know at the time that this would become something vocational for me. But I kind of fell in love with the idea of being part of the new South Africa, even if it was in just a very small way.
I mean, there's so many angles I could pick up on. I think what's really interesting, I think, as well, is that firstly, that I love that your description of getting out there and going on an adventure, probably for most people, that would be probably at the extreme end of going on adventures, like you said, ending up sort of, with gunfire going on and working with some really, really challenging situations as well. And like you said, at a time which was pretty anarchic and uncertain for so many reasons, but also really exciting and full of possibility too. And I guess the other thing I was just thinking is that, nowadays there's quite a big movement around blue health and about how surfing can be so beneficial from a psychological perspective and can help build sort of resilience or, help people develop and access a part of themselves. But I'm guessing probably back then there was much less of a sort of research connection. So I was just wondering, I mean, did that sort of develop as a result of just of your own passion for surfing and bring the two together? Or what was it that sort of made you think, actually, this is something that could really work?
Back in those days, of course, the blue health thing literally didn't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, there was at the time, back in 1998, there was no organization that we knew of that was using surfing as a tool for positive good. And so that has changed massively. So it was absolutely new. Interestingly enough, and because I spent quite a bit of time in Brazil throughout that time, just visiting, because they had some really interesting responses to the phenomena of street children, I did learn that around about the same time that we started up with the surfing, there was a program in one of the favelas in Rio that started as well. So, certainly not trying to sort of claim we were the first, but just to say that it was such a different era. I mean, there are so many kind of surf therapy or blue health programs now, which is great. It's fantastic. But back then it really was something kind of considered very extraordinary. And I worked with street kids for a long time before I even considered the idea of fusing surfing into the models. And partly that was because I loved surfing. I'd grown up surfing, and I kind of didn't want to impose what I did on the kids. And also, I suppose at that time, I felt that they might be more interested in things that were more, I wanted to be careful also not to impose my own sort of culture. And actually, it was something that I kind of learned a lesson with it, actually, because we had an array of programs back in '98. We had football, art, drama, music, and I brought surfing in as a program. So it was actually a girls' program to start with, because the boys they'd been a bit mean with the girls about playing soccer with them. And so we sat down with the girls, said, well, let's think of a program. Do you want to play soccer, or do you want to? And in the end, we had this idea to run a surfing program, and we started it, and it was fun, but it kind of was just one of our programs and kind of fizzled a little bit. And actually, partly because our response to girls in the streets was quite intense because of the dangers that they were facing at the time on the street. So we'd often take the kids out really fast, and so the priority wasn't to get them surfing. The priority was to get them out of the streets. Course. So the one day I was actually surfing myself, and I was surfing at Durban's sort of premier surf spot called the New Pier. And I was sitting out back, but it was a small day. So out back is right under the pier almost. And one of the kids was on the pier. And actually, this was before we started with the girls. But this kid was called Tula, and Tula came running up the pier. And he said, Tom, I want to surf. And I knew he could swim because he was in our program. So I said, okay, jump off the pier. And he jumped off, and I put the leg rope on him, and I pushed him into the wave. And I couldn't see him because I'm behind the wave, but I heard him hooting all the way down.
Oh, wow.
And then he grabbed the board, ran up the sand, ran up the pier, and wanted to go again. And it was kind of like a light bulb moment. And I suddenly realized, wow, this surfing's given me so much over the years, and so much joy, so much stoke. It's been a real release, an escape, an adventure, so many things. And I kind of felt a bit bad that I hadn't thought that perhaps the kids would like this. And so we said to them, well, do you want to do this program? And again, going back to the story of the girls, we started the program with the girls, and amazingly, it kind of fizzled out at first. And then we had a new crew of kids, boys and girls, that came in, and it really became popular. And this is back in 98. And at the time, there was no surfing program where surfing was a tool for positive good. And we just found that it became such a strong program that it did a couple of things. One, it was an extremely useful tool, surfing was, in alongside mentorship and care for transforming the lives of street children. It just worked so well. And what I put that down to, perhaps, is that there's something about surfing whereby you're forced for the length of your ride to entirely live in the moment. Like there's no room for anything else, especially on a shortboard. You're so consumed from beginning to end. And there's something absolutely incredible and maybe addictive about living in the moment. And you're forced to do it. And we found that and the adrenaline and the stoke that gave off just made that was something that was more powerful than the pulls of the streets, which were primarily drugs and other street problems. And so we found that the fit was absolutely incredible. So that was one thing that we were surprised at. And secondly, we realized that what the surfing did after a while was make a major change to Durban's racial demographics of surfing. So this was incredible because at the time, surfing was almost exclusively white. In the 90s, there were a handful of surfers, really nice guys who had started surfing, but they really had to be very careful to sort of act white. And they would assimilate, to try really hard not to annoy anyone. And they were kind of sort of made to feel that, you're there on the terms of those who are already there. They were really nice people, and some of them made some really great friendships on the beach as well. But that kind of fizzled a bit as well. And then this crew from Surfers Not Street Children came in at the beginning of 2000, because 1998 they were still learning. And then in the 2000s they started getting good enough to surf the new pier well, and they were this new wave of black surfers, and it really did it's widely recognized to have changed the racial demographics and open surfing up to people of color. And interestingly enough, a similar thing has happened in the last 4 years. And although there had been girls and boys involved in the program, it became very much a boy program. And that was because we'd got a lot of the girls out of the streets very quickly because of the sense of urgency on that and into care. And about 5 years ago, we realized that we really needed a more targeted program specifically for girls. And so we started a program called Girls Surf 2. And Girls Surf 2 was using the same model of fusing surfing with mentorship and care, run by our head social worker, a female social worker, South African social worker. And this program has also done the same thing. It's the first black girl crew of surfers in Durban. Now, there have been a couple of black female surfers in the past, youngsters. But similar to the 90s, there wasn't a crew. And this is the first black girl crew in Durban that has really sort of become part of the beachfront and part of the surfing community. They're surfing for KwaZulu-Natal, sort of in contests and on the provincial team. So it's really exciting to see that type of change as well.
That's incredible. And I think, again, so many layers, but There's often, because I know one of the things, or one of the criticisms is often leveled when it comes to, sports like surfing particularly, which are particularly portrayed in the media as being very homogenous in terms of a culture. It's typically white, slim, men, women, who fit this sort of image of what surfing would look like or should look like in people's minds. And that actually to start dismantling those barriers and to be, accessing that when, that's not being reflected back at you, I think is so challenging. But also to, like you said, to interweave that sort of political change in a way of going, look, we're changing the demographic makeup out in the water and showing that inclusion, that possibility to other children as well who are out there. I can imagine that must be immensely powerful. And like you said, takes time as well. It has to be, it's things that don't happen automatically, but that slowly. I was just thinking back, I remember going to beaches as a kid with my parents and then being segregated along the beachfront, that there were certain beaches that only were whites only. And I remember being horrified as a child, because obviously having been brought up in England, that wasn't even something, a consciousness, and to go. So I think it's also something about that is such an immense change in a period of time that, like you said, has gone from such a difficult and challenging place to where it is today. And like you said, there's still so much to do. I mean, I can only imagine there must have been so many challenges you faced over the last sort of 20 plus years with the charity. I was just wondering if there's been one particular challenge that you've faced or that's really stuck with you, but also that you're sort of really proud to have overcome.
I think the most difficult challenges are always within the scope of who we work with, is the fact that most of the kids come in with trauma, and often with addiction. And if there was no trauma and addiction with the kids, it would be a lot easier. It just makes it, trauma is illogical. You can't present a logical and rational way out of a situation and expect that someone traumatized will just see it and say, oh yeah, that's a great idea, I'll do that. So that makes it really challenging on the ground, and that was always complicated. And sometimes you can just say, why is this child not seizing this opportunity? Why can't they see it? And that's why it's so obviously so important just working very closely, rather than telling them what to do. You've got to give them the tools to work it out themselves. So that's on the ground probably the most challenging thing. And then of course, in terms of the actual charity itself, there's many frustrations. I mean, running charity is not easy. Anyone who says it is, I'm like, okay, I don't know. I think the biggest thing we went through was after the financial crash of 2008, 2009, it was delayed in South Africa because of the World Cup. And so we were we were flying as a charity in the sort of from about 2006 onwards through to about 2010. And then literally after the FIFA World Cup, it was like an axe went across our funding, and it all just went boom, dried up. And the most challenging, the years I'd never want to relive, is 2011 and 2012, because it was just fighting for the survival of the organization and making sure that we could continue to serve the kids, and knowing that we'd started something pretty important in the kids' lives, and because it was a fight. And I would say it took probably in real terms at least 7 years, and maybe the entire decade to recover and rebuild, which actually is a long time.
A long time.
That's not to say that incredible and wonderful things didn't happen during that time alongside the challenges, but that would be an era that I wouldn't want to live again. That I wouldn't want to relive that. And also, with all of these things, there's a lot of things that taught me in terms of how to run a charity and how to protect a charity, and it coincided with the numbers of street kids in between 2000 and 2010 were absolutely huge, because the AIDS crisis had been in full flow and was in full flow, at least for part of that. And so the numbers of kids we were working with were just phenomenally large. And we had scaled up for that. And then as we got better at what we were doing, and certain dynamics changed, and the numbers dropped a bit, and we started looking at different the kids that were not just on the streets, and those that were at risk of street connectedness and stuff. The dynamics changed, and we hadn't really thought about that. So these are all questions that we had to start asking ourselves: how to structure, how to think about vision and growth, and what do we really want to do? Do we just want to sort of start projects in loads of different cities and get bigger and bigger? And we actually decided that we wanted to stay very Durban orientated, and it was only after about 5 years after that we did venture into Mozambique as well. But it was a serious amount of discussion and reflection as to whether we even wanted to go to another place, because we felt so committed to the scenario in Durban. Our goal obviously is that no child should have to live on the streets. But what's the difference between a kid who lives on the streets and somebody who lives in one of these so-called shelters in downtown Point in Durban, potentially with a mother, it's street life under a roof in those places. And we realized they had exactly the same needs. And so we couldn't just say, well, we won't serve that person, but we will serve this one because they live on the streets. And so we realized that, wow, this is actually way bigger than we even realized. And that's why we broadened to include children at risk of street connectedness as well.
Gosh, I was just thinking about that process, because often I guess what people see is the sort of the end result. They come to the point or where you are now and go, look at all these amazing things that you've achieved. And, and I think we often do that when we're looking at what other people have achieved through life as well. And just that thing about, like you said, about that process that that there are these highs, or this sense of that you're really helping people, and then another problem comes along and then you're having to sort of rework around that as well. And that it's a sort of no matter how much there's always so much to learn in that as well. And I guess I'm just thinking that, there must be the obvious benefits in terms of when you do see the children really thrive and emerge from your program having really gained so much from it personally and feel that they are in a safer and better place. But I guess just sort of maybe reflecting back to where you started with this, thinking what have been the unexpected benefits that have come for you, the things that you never imagined when you went where you were starting off?
I suppose, it sounds slightly cliched, but I suppose I'd never realized how much fun it would be working with the kids on the street. And it really has been. I really enjoy, obviously I'm not a social worker and I have great social workers at the program, but I really enjoy sort of going surfing with the kids and hanging out with them. It's really good fun. They are fantastic kids, and then our staff's absolutely amazing as well. So there's a lot of stoke that I've got out of it, and I didn't expect that. I think we've had some extraordinary moments with the kids. I didn't realize that. I think it took me a while to understand that, given what the kids have been through, that an ordinary outcome is extraordinary in the lives of the kids. And I don't mean that in a condescending way in the slightest, but we've had a couple of incredible stories of kids who've sort of gone on and done pro surfing, and we had one kid finish 17th in the world, and that is extraordinary. But we've also had kids that have become coffee baristas and have worked in restaurants or surf shops or lifeguards or surf coaches or whatever it is. And all those ordinary stories are actually extraordinary when you think of the fact that they were standing by the traffic lights, sniffing glue and begging as 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds. And so that was quite a learning curve for me, because, dignity in the lives of the kids, I had to really understand how kids got their dignity once they were adults, what it was that really made them feel like they'd made it. And that was interesting, seeing kids that had the opportunity. One kid who was a professional surfer actually had the opportunity to travel the world and doing, just had so many connections that he could have taken. And actually his dignity came from being in his hometown, working in a surf shop, and being a good surfer, and I really kind of it was a real learning moment for me, because I realized it's not so much about what others can see in terms of his potential, but it's understanding where his needs lie, and his or hers, where their dignity will be found. That was quite a learning curve. So there's loads of little life lessons that the kids have taught over the years.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Is it that you've learned so much from them as well? And I was just thinking that bit about, there's probably so much we could learn around, what is the thing that makes you feel whole and happy and
yes, exactly,
grounded versus what we think we should be achieving. So I mean, you've achieved amazing things in the last sort of 20 plus years with the charity. I mean, what's next? What would you like? You've alluded to it already, but what would you like to develop further going forward?
Well, I think we really want to continue to develop our Durban program, because although we are doing well on reducing the number of kids on the streets, I think there's a lot of hidden suffering, particularly in the downtown urban part of Durban, the Point, just behind the beachfront. That's an area that kind of gets missed out. It's not seen as a township. It's just seen as urban. And so it doesn't quite have the community programs and development that other areas would. So we're really committed to doing that. Our immediate concern is the fact that COVID has had a real effect on the kids and the families that we serve. Not so much the disease itself, but the economic implications of that. So a lot of the parents were working in the informal sector, and there's no support for the informal sector, and they lose their meager incomes. And so, for example, what we've done is we had sort of an emergency response nutrition program for the kids that really needed it. We had about 50 kids in there. We've now got 200 plus in the program, and that's just because of COVID. And in the recent troubles in South Africa, that was it really highlighted how important that was when we were struggling to even get the food into the kids. And it's quite incredible how people rallied around and helped us with that. So my immediate goal is we got to step up this program of support during COVID, knowing that even if the pandemic ended tomorrow, the economic repercussions are going to take some time. So this is probably a 2-year program. And it was crazy because normally if we're starting a new program, we'll plan it for like 6 months and make sure we got everything ready. But we literally had to have a meeting in a week and say, there's a problem. What are we going to do? We're going to do a new program. Oh my goodness. It's like such a undertaking financially. So to make sure that that's fully funded is our absolute priority. Make sure the kids are fully supported with nutrition, safe spaces, and social workers throughout the pandemic period, and the aftermath of the pandemic period is our primary concern at this stage. We also making sure that the Mozambique program is supported and in a similar way during this time. So, and then I think that really is sort of the next couple of years are going to be consumed with that. So we want to absolutely commit to that, because we know that it would be kind of madness thinking of, do we want to work somewhere else? Have we got any grand plans? Of course, there are plans we have long-term and in the background, but right at this stage, the COVID era is so serious in terms of its impact that our commitment is to make sure that we're able to support the kids in the ways that they need during this time.
And like you said, there've been so many different waves of challenge in a way that have hit over the last year. Any one of them on their own would be, hard enough. But, and again, that thing of going, okay, we need to really focus in our efforts here. So I guess for someone listening to this and they're thinking, that there is a group of people I'd like to support. I'd like to set up my own charity or do something, to support others, or, that there's something that's been going back to your original comment about, in a way, how you were looking for adventure when you first headed out there. What would be your one piece of advice to give someone who wants to get started on an adventure of their own?
My one piece of advice to someone who wanted to get started on their own adventure is to firstly see what's out there already. To make sure that when I started the programs, it was a really difficult time in South Africa, and it was an extraordinary time. And if I was doing it now, I'd look at what local initiatives were in place that I could support rather than starting something anew. Not least all because times have changed, but also because essentially local people have the indigenous knowledge to be able to do these things the best. We're really, I mean, I'm an English guy running a program in South Africa and Mozambique. So to compensate for that, we have incredible local leadership. So I don't do the day-to-day running of the South Africa and the Mozambique program, because essentially we've got local South Africans who are just excellent and local Mozambicans who are excellent at doing that. So yes, firstly, definitely look at what's out there already and how can you support. And then just to surround yourself with people who are supportive and know what they're doing, because things can get dangerous. I mean, I do look back sometimes and wonder at some of the things that I did out of absolute naivety, how I kind of got away with it safely. You know, there were some really hair-raising moments over the years. I mean, I remember during the height of tensions in about 92, trying to find this Street Kids project in a township in South Africa. And it just, out of total naivety, I just walked into the township on my own. And at the time, that was a very, very dangerous thing to do because of the history, not because the people were horrible, just because of the history of apartheid. And I walked in, and as I was walking in, there was a lot of interest, and a couple of guys came and said, "Hey, you know, how are you doing? What are you doing?" And then one guy said, "Oh, I'm going to walk with you." You know, they obviously realized that it was dangerous, and that is nuts. You know, no one should do that. You know, at least those type of risks are actually unnecessary, because things can go wrong. So I would say, you know, is make sure that you're surrounded by people who really know the local scenario, and so that you're in a supported and safe situation.
No, that's such good advice. And yeah, I can similarly think of things that I probably did in my teens and 20s that, looking back, thank God my parents probably didn't know about them. But yeah, like you said, you know, it's that thing of an element of naivety, also, you know, that, what's the word? That sort of being prepared just to give it a go, I think does help you get you started, particularly obviously given your context. Yeah, getting good people. And I think that's something also that's really struck me about your program, is actually the local involvement, that the people on the ground who are running the program and involved in it, you know, that's very much at the forefront of everything you do. And, you know, has obviously been part of the reason why it's been such a success and has been owned in that way, you know, at a ground level too. So thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate you making the time this evening as well, because I know it's not been without its challenges on its own. If people want to find out more about the program, about the charity, where can they go?
Two places, particularly Instagram, Surfers Not Street Children, and then our website, surfnotstreets.org. And if you go on there, and if they want to get sort of our newsletters, which are quite informative and not too frequent, so they're kind of not annoying, I know what that's like, then they can just sign up there.
Fantastic. And I know you've been running a recent campaign as well, all around following on for the Durban riots and that side of things as well. So,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, our most recent campaign after the riots is a continued campaign, because it's kind of around what we were doing before the riots as well, which was the response to COVID. So that's on the website and on Instagram as well.
Brilliant. I'll make sure I'll share all of those links in the show notes as well, so people can go. But yeah, really encourage everyone to go and check out the work that Tom and his team are doing, because it really is phenomenal, and particularly, you know, in such challenging circumstances at the moment. Tom, thank you so much. That's been absolutely amazing. I really appreciate
thanks so much.
Your time.
Well, I appreciate it too. So thank you. That's great.
Thanks so much again. Bye. So a huge thank you to Tom for coming on the show and for sharing his story, the story of Surfers Not Street Children, and for sharing his insight and his experience over the last 20 odd years of running the charity. I want to pick up on a theme this week, which isn't something that we necessarily talked about as part of the show today, but which is something that really struck me as part of the conversation, which is around commitment. And I think partly why it struck me is because, like I said, you know, Tom has been doing the work that he's been doing for really quite a considerable length of time. And through that, as he said, that there have been some really difficult moments, some really difficult times, which he's had to work through, that he and his team have had to find ways to navigate, to move around, to move through, to keep going. And I think part of that is that I think there can be quite a dominant narrative nowadays that success or achievement or making things happen sort of happens instantaneously. We have an idea and then we do it and it either works or it doesn't work. And I think what Tom's story really illustrates is actually the power of commitment, of keeping on going, of finding a way through, but also that we don't always know when we start out, things don't necessarily look like they do further down the line. That Tom started out with one idea and it progressed to another, and that the surfing came in as part of that journey, but further down the line. And I think sometimes the thing that can stop us with setting out on an adventure or taking on a new challenge or trying something new is this feeling that it's only worth something, or its merit is in whether it lands the next day, the next week, the next month, whether it gains instant traction. But the reality is that adventure might morph, it might change, it might follow a different path. But we will only know that if we commit to it, if we're prepared to go with those highs, with those lows, with those moments we really haven't got a clue what we're doing, but somehow find the resources or the energy or the support to keep going and try to navigate through and be able to sit with that not knowing too. So that's where I'd like to leave it this week. I hope in some way that inspires you, whatever adventure you have in your own mind or adventure that you're currently on, that even when things get hard, that doesn't mean that it's not working. It doesn't mean, and that's not saying that there isn't sometimes a time to step away and to recognize when it's time to move on from things, but that it's not always clear cut. And I think by knowing that, we can allow ourselves that time for the murkiness, for the not knowing, for the lack of instant validation or knowledge that this is the right thing to do. Anyway, I'd love to know what you think. Please do reach out, get in touch. You can find me at Resilience at Work on Instagram. You can find me at resiliencework.co.uk. That's my website. You can join us in the Facebook group, the Everyday Adventure Club, or get in touch via LinkedIn. You can find me, Nikki Bass. And I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, next week, we've got a bit of a break because I'm going on half term and it's very difficult to record it or to navigate that around kids wanting to jump in the sea. So I am away for a week. But I will have a short bonus episode for you. So do keep an eye out for that. And otherwise, I will be back with another fantastic episode for season 4 the following week. So at the end of October. And I really look forward to seeing you again then. Take care. Bye.